Hi, my name is Elsie, and welcome to my series on learning objectives for data visualization design. In this first video, I'm going to cover what a learning objective is and how you can create them. So if you're someone who creates data visualizations to communicate to other people, I'm going to teach you how you can use learning objectives to better describe what your goals are, and later on in the series, I will cover how you can use them to create better designs and evaluate whether you've achieved your goals. Let's get started. First up, I'll start by saying that this mostly applies to communicative visualizations. So I usually divide visualizations into two buckets, analytical and communicative. Some people call these exploratory and explanatory. I'll be talking about goals for visualizations where you already have something in mind that you want to communicate to the audience. Okay, the datavis process is more complicated than this, but here are some simplified steps. Learning objectives can help you throughout this whole process. You can use them to describe what your goals are, and this could be helpful for you yourself as the designer, but it can also be helpful if you are working within a team or with external clients. They can be used to get everyone on the same page about what the goals of a project are. Now, once you are actually designing the visualization, there are a lot of decisions you can make, such as the chart type, the colors, the title, etc. Learning objectives can help you during this part too. If you have your goals clearly in mind, then you can make decisions that are in line with what will help you achieve them. This next one goes with it as well. If you have several designs that you've made, you can choose amongst them based on what your objective is. This last part may or may not be something you already do, but how do you know if your visualization is successful? Learning objectives can be used to create assessments so that you can evaluate whether or not you've achieved your goal. Okay, so what is a learning objective? They are simple, specific statements that communicate the purpose of a visualization and the outcomes for the viewer who will see it. There are different styles of learning objectives, but I suggest a simple framing in the form of the viewer will verb noun. The verbs are cognitive processes, actions that the viewer should be able to do, such as recall or compare. And the nouns are knowledge objects, like facts or concepts. Here are a few examples of learning objectives. This graph shows equal rates of marijuana usage between white and black people, but a difference in arrest rates. Here are a few goals that the designer could have had for this graph. The viewer will recall the average rate of marijuana usage. The viewer will compare the arrest rates for white and black people. The viewer will attribute the disparity to systemic racism. These learning objectives are based on Bloom's taxonomy, which is a hierarchy of verbs and nouns that span a range of learning. The verbs in a learning objective can vary from simple, like recall, to complex actions, like generate a hypothesis. You may have heard of SMART goals, and we can use that acronym to help us make good learning objectives too. You should use specific and measurable verbs and avoid ambiguous, broad verbs such as understand, learn, or know. A vague objective could be the viewer will understand marijuana usage and possession arrest rates by race. But how would you assess if somebody understood this? It's too vague. So a better objective could be the viewer will infer disparities between marijuana usage and possession arrest rates by race. Now it's more specific and clear about what the goal is. A simple test can check this by asking our viewers to conclude what the reason is for these data. Goals should also be achievable, meaning that they should be something that the audience should realistically be able to do. So you should take into consideration who your audience is. For example, it might be more realistic to get an audience without any prior knowledge to recall the information. Whereas if your audience already has expertise, it might be more relevant to have them analyze or evaluate the information. Relevant goals means that they should be aligned with your values or long-term goals. And time-bound means that you should consider if the goal should be achieved after a single visualization or if they are more long-term goals. We've created a site called visualobjectives.net that has a list of verbs at the various levels of the taxonomy that you can plug in the noun that you want to focus on and read through a lot of the verbs to see which best describes your objective. The objectives I've covered up until now are what I would call cognitive objectives. These are typically what you would think of when you think about learning, facts and concepts and knowledge. There's a second type of learning objective called affective learning objectives. These are when you are trying to achieve a reaction or response to an appraisal, attitude, or value. These may be less talked about, but they are still very important. This visualization can also have affective goals. For example, the viewer will consider the harm of racism, or the viewer will support racial justice initiatives. Some affective visualizations are more expressive, like this visualization from Periscopic about US gun deaths. This visualization is animated. It has a pace to it. The encoded data is not just how many people were killed, but a calculation of how many years they could have lived, which was stolen from them. The purpose of this is not cognitive, but it is affective. I could describe an affective goal such as the viewer will perceive gun violence, or the viewer will agree that gun violence is a problem. Similar to the cognitive objectives, there's also a taxonomy of verbs and noun types for the affective objectives. The verbs start at a basic observe, where the goal is just to make the viewer aware of a belief, and then agree with it, support it, compare it to other beliefs, and finally, to take action in line with that belief. The nouns start at appraisal, which is the value judgment of a data fact. For example, the data fact may be that the United States is the largest historical emitter of greenhouse gases. An appraisal might be that the United States is the worst offender of greenhouse gas emissions. Attitudes are a subjective disposition towards something. A value is a deeply held belief, like sustainability. And finally, a value system is a set of beliefs, like Democrats or Republicans. Some common mistakes when making learning objectives are combining multiple goals into one. For example, the viewer will compare the rates of marijuana usage and arrests and attribute the difference to systemic racism. It's better to split them into two separate objectives so you can evaluate both of them. It makes constructing questions a little bit easier and lets us focus on which, or if any, of the objectives have been met. It's possible that the viewer is able to achieve one, but not the other. Another mistake is using non-measurable verbs, such as understand. And try to match your goals with the best fitting level of verb. If you have a goal to get someone to remember, then choose an objective at the lower levels of the taxonomy. If you do have an ambitious goal, ask yourself, are you really aiming to achieve a change in behavior? And how achievable is that? It's easy to blur the lines between cognitive and affective goals. When you're making these goals, think about what the noun represents. Is it an appraisal, opinion, or value? Or are you communicating a fact, concept, or cognitive type of knowledge? Think about what you want to remain in the viewer's head after you take away the visualizations. Learning objectives should reflect what you want to persist, and not just what they get out of the visualization when actively looking at it. For example, I want the viewers to attribute the disparity to systemic racism in this chart that I am giving them. But I also want them to be able to attribute the disparity to systemic racism if I give them a second chart. The learning should persist past the particular instance of one visualization. I have been focusing on learning objectives for a single specific visualization. However, programmatic learning objectives could be created as broader goals that a designer aims to achieve over a longer period of time and over several or many visualizations. These could be overarching career goals or maybe broader goals for a series of visualizations. And the specific single visualization learning objectives can scaffold to achieve the programmatic learning objective. And the broad programmatic learning objective can also help guide a designer in developing those specific learning objectives and designing visualizations. Okay, now for a short pop quiz. Here's a graph about different forms of energy production, which shows death per terawatt hours and greenhouse gas emissions. One thing I will point out here is that the label for nuclear power is in bold, And this graph is based on a version that was published in an article in The Economist that was about nuclear energy. Okay, now I'll show you a learning objective to evaluate. The viewer will agree that nuclear power is a safe and clean source of energy. What do you think? Is this a good learning objective or not? Pause the video now if you need more time to think. I'll reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. It's a good one. It's an affective objective. The descriptors safe and clean are appraisals that are evaluating nuclear power as good. Agree is a verb from the affective taxonomy. Okay, the next one is the viewer will learn about the greenhouse gas emissions in popular energy sources. Is this a good learning objective? Correct answer coming in 3, 2, 1. This is not a good learning objective. The verb here is learn, which is so vague. It doesn't answer the question of what the viewer will be able to do or know after seeing the visualization. And here's the final one. The viewer will summarize the relationship between greenhouse gas emissions and deaths. And this is a good learning objective. The verb summarize is one that is measurable. You can imagine a question on a test that asks a student to summarize a concept. Just to recap, explicitly describing your goals can help you make better data visualizations. It can make it easier to communicate project goals within a team or to external clients. In the next video, I'm going to cover more information about how learning objectives can help you design or choose better visualizations. Then after that, I'll use learning objectives to create assessments for evaluation, like how a teacher would make a quiz. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll try out creating learning objectives for your next visualization project. My name's Elsie, and this video was brought to you by me and my collaborator, Eitan Adar. Together, we've worked on several research papers on the topic of learning objectives, which will be listed in the description if you want to learn more. If you want to find out how to use these learning objectives in the design process to choose better designs, check out our next video in the series.